This video is on the Soul Data Viewer Rule Manager, and we're going to talk about the SDV rules section of this particular manager software. You'll notice that we'll use the button and we'll just go ahead and click on the SDV rules. And the way this is organized is we have a list of folders. And this list of folders that you see corresponds to the Web Soul Survey folders. So I can come in here and take a look at any of this information. Here are my folders for building, construction, disaster, etc. It is the same set of folders that you see over here. Now then, you'll notice that we've got suitabilities and limitations for use, and we've also got soil properties. Let me briefly discuss the soil properties and qualities thematic maps. These are generated at the national level, and they're basically a soil property. For instance, I'm in the soil chemical properties, and I've used the cation exchange capacity CEC7 surface layer, and I've viewed the rating so that you can take a look at the results and the thematic map. These are soil properties. These are the properties that you see commonly in the horizon table. We also have suitabilities and limitations that include properties. We can create a map of a quote-unquote property that's an interpretation. You know, for the concrete corrosion and the steel corrosion, you literally enter those into a column in the component table. They're not a generated interpretation from the NASA's interp generator. But they are still considered an interpretation, and they still need a Soul Data Viewer rule to be able to create them, and we'll go into more detail here in a minute on that. So that gives you the two different types. The dwellings with basements is a generated interpretation, and then which is an interpretation, and then you also have steel corrosion, which is a property, and you'll see that here when I click over. I'm going to open up the building site development, and you'll notice that I've got all of the interpretations subfoldered by the regional offices. I'm going to focus on NSSC Pangea, and I want to explain to you. You'll notice that we've got two icon differences here. The property icon and the interpretation icon. And just to give you an example, you can create a new one, new property rule or a new interpretation rule using that. I'm going to start with the dwellings with basements just to show you how these are populated. It's very easy to create these interpretation rules. The first thing you'll notice is that all you're doing is in the general information, you're putting in what the rule name is going to appear in Web Soil Survey, and you're going to have the rule description. So as a state soil scientist, you've got a whole list of interpretations, and you're wanting to post these up on Web Soil Survey. You'll put in the rule name, and you'll have to have a rule description, as I explained in the reports. And as I explained in the documentation, this is an official web portal for the USDA, and therefore everything that's posted on this site is to go through a technical edit and an English edit. So you'll need to make sure you got a good technical edit done on your interpretation, make sure your interpretation performs correctly, and you'll also need to document that interpretation, and that documentation is a required field. You'll notice the asterisk next to the word description. The next thing you'll see is a result column name. Now, the interpretation, when it's created in SDV, it's put into a temporary SDV table, and you need to assign a column name to it, and that's what you're seeing here is as dwell WB. That will be the temporary column name that is storing the results of this interpretation. Keep in mind, these interpretations are already stored by component in the Soul Data Mart. But what you're doing now is you're creating a thematic map, and it has to be aggregated up to the map unit level. And in order to do that, we have to create a temporary column to store that aggregated result. That's the reason why you're establishing a new column name. You're limited to 10 characters. Don't get too concerned with naming conventions, other than the fact that you'd like to have it somewhat representative of the rule name. The rest of this, you'll notice, is the review information, the status. The processing options. You have different methods of aggregation. All of this is well documented into the user guide, so feel free to read that before worrying too much about what what we've got here. We've got a dominant condition on this particular one, or we can set the dominant component, the least limiting, the most limiting, or the weighted average. What you're doing here is establishing what you feel is the default aggregation method for this particular interpretation. Keep in mind the user can change that default, but this is the one that that you're telling the user to recommend, that you're recommending for their use when they open up this particular interpretation. If they don't like it, they can always override it. Then you have to establish what your folder and your land use is. In this particular one, we're working with dwellings with basements, and so the building site development is going to be the folder. And then you're going to identify the specific land uses. Remember that in Web Soul Survey, people can specify land uses and then look at the interpretations based off of land use. So make sure that you select all the land uses that are appropriate for that particular interpretation. The map legend is that colorization that you see on the actual map, and you'll notice that we've got the stoplight interpretation defined here, the red, yellow, and green. And also notice that the class name is sentence case. That's one of the requirements on all the rating values that are supposed to be coming out of NASA's. And then of course the edit notes, and this is new, allows you to come in here and document the process of this entire SDV rule. For instance, when you happen to have created it and then submitted it for approval. So that gives you the background, the information that you have to populate. Then you'll go ahead and save it. As usual, you can always do a save as new. You can create something different, save it as new, and then change it. But chances of using this save as new on an interpretation is very slim. I can close this out. I can actually delete this one if I wanted to. And then you'll have a request for certification, whereas on my screen it comes as approved. Alright, so that gives you the basic rundown on what this particular interpretation parameter box looks like. I'm going to click on corrosion of concrete just to show you that when you click on something it changes. And that's the importance of making sure you save before you click outside here, because you'll lose your edits if you don't. Now then, on this one, this is a property SDV rule. It's pulling the component.corecon corrosion concrete. Here's the resulting concrete, the resulting column name. We have constraints in this one. We can have a primary constraint. They don't have a choice on this, but we could go in here and assign what the primary and a secondary constraint is on that particular property. Once again, go back into the data, into the user guide if you want clearer information on what a constraint is on a property. And then we can also include a where clause in this. I could come in here and say, since we're dealing with concrete corrosion, I can say where the major component flag is equal to yes. And that's only going to allow you to get information for those major components, not the minor components. Now you wouldn't do that, but that just gives you an idea of where clause would be used. Your processing options, once again, establishes what your default aggregation method is, and you can choose any of the other ones if you want to. But remember, you're assigning a default aggregation method, the one you feel the customer should use, even though the customer has the capability of changing afterwards. We also have the tie-breaking rules for this particular one. You'll see this of more value in some of the horizon properties, but for this one, you know, if you had a 40-40 and one was the well, this was not a good one to explain to, but you have the ability to choose a tiebreaker rule. Then you got the folders and the land uses. Once again, this is under building site development folder, and you can choose which particular land uses you're wanting. And then the map legend is, once again, this one is identified as the custom unique defined, and you have options here because this is a choice field. And you'll notice you've got the high, moderate, and low values. And then once again, also we've included the edit notes. With any editing that goes on, you can modify those. You can make note of any modifications on this particular one. And then when you're done with it, you'll go ahead and click on Request for Certification, and you'll push it on up. Okay, that gives you a basic synopsis of the parameter box that you're going to be populating. It takes just a few minutes to do that, and in order to show you that, we're going to create a new one. And I'm not going to worry about property rules because I've told you property rules are mainly handled by the national office. Most of what you're going to be focused on are the interpretation rules. So we're going to create us a new interpretation rule. Let me show you how quickly and how easily this is done. You begin with a search, a parameter search box, and you have 3 different types of searches. But before you go into the search, you have to understand what the criteria is here. And the criteria is, first of all, the state and local interpretations that you're creating. They have to conform to the naming convention, and the naming convention is that they have a parenthetical state code at the end of the name of the interpretation in NASA's. The only exception to that is the Pangea rules. The Pangea rules do not have any parenthetical suffixes. The interpretation in NASA's has to be marked as the primary interpretation, and those that are marked in NASA's have to be set ready for use. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for all of the primary interpretations that are in NASA's. So I'm going to pick on Connecticut here, and because I picked on Pennsylvania last time. So I'm using the percent sign for the like wildcard. And all of the Connecticut interpretations are not in Pangea, they are in Amherst. So I'm going to choose Amherst. I'm going to find all of those interpretations. And lo and behold, here are all the primary interpretations that are in NASA's that are owned by Amherst that have the CT, the Connecticut, at the end of the suffix name. And I can scroll through here and I can show you that we've got 3 pages or 24 different interpretations. Now let's change this up. This tells me what I've got in NASA's. But now I need a little bit more information because I don't want to be creating the sole data viewer rule for something that's already been created. So I'm going to click on Find the Primary Interpretations in NASA's that do not have a corresponding. Once again, I'm going to use that same search criteria of Connecticut. And I'm going to use Amherst and not Pangea. And I'm going to find the interpretations. Now I've got 24, so that means that I've got 24 interpretations that are in NASA's that I don't have a sole data viewer rule on. So none of this has changed. I've still got a lot of information that the public hasn't seen yet. So that's NASA's information, but what I'm more concerned about now is I've got information on, I hope, in the sole data mart. So let's check sole data mart and let's look for the Connecticut data for all the survey areas, and there's only one. And I've found 23 interpretations on the soil data mart, and they do not have a soil data viewer rule. So I've got a lot of work to do here. How long is it going to take me to do all this work? Well, let me show you. We're going to pick on the first one, this closed loop horizontal geothermal heat pump. And you'll notice we've got an action column, the interpretation, the type of interpretation that we've got. You need to know that. Go back into your documentation to look at your different choices of map legends. And then the NASA site that owns that. I'm going to click on the plus. And what it does is opens up a new SDV rule using that interpretation. So here we are. We've got the new, the save as new, and the close. The only one I'm going to use, I use new to be able to create the interpretation rule. I'll have to use the save here in a minute, and I can use the close to close it out. That's my only menu buttons I have to worry about. This is a particular interpretation that's owned by Amherst. I'm going to start this, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to use geothermal heat pumps as the name. And I'm going to just, for the lack of suitability here, I'm going to type in suitability. So I've got geothermal heat pump suitability. And then remember the asterisks. I have to have this documented, and that documentation has to have an English edit. So I'm just going to put in, this is a test of developing an SDV rule. And then the default column name, I'm going to call geotherm as my default column name. And this is going to be available in basic mode. And my processing, okay, so I'm done with the general information. And my processing options, you'll notice that my options can be the dominant condition or the dominant component. I'm going to go in here and set the dominant component as the default aggregation method. I've got the folders and land uses. This is going to be a building site development folder. And I want to put this in the urban, the recreation, and since there's forest land that they're putting houses in, I'll choose forest land also. So now I've put this in 3 different land uses that customers will be able to see in Web Soul Survey. Then the map legend is a stoplight interpretation defined. You'll notice that based off of the choices that I have available to me on the rating values, that is the selection that was made by the software. We have specific naming conventions for the rating values that do not seem to have been followed on here. So I'm going to change the class names here. I'm just going to show you how easy it is to change up the class names. I'm going to put in unsuitable for geothermal heat pumps. And I don't need soil component has low. I'm just going to put in low suitability. And then I'll put in the moderate suitability. So all I'm doing here is just changing the way it's going to appear on Web Soul Survey and the Soul Data Mart. And then I'll change up this one to be high suitability. Alright, so I'm done with that. I've made my changes, and then I'll come in here and I'll put in my edit notes. And I come back over here to General, and I look everything over, make sure that my rule description is functioning fine, make sure my processing options, I'm going to use dominant component, folders are fine, map legend is fine, and then what I'll do is I'll save it. It's been saved. I'll come over here to the building site development in Amherst, and there's my geothermal SDV rule. And from here, I'll click on the request for certification. You'll notice mine says approved, and then it'll send an email up, and then I will work with the editors to make sure everything was fine. I do the final QA before I push it over to the Web Soul Survey and the Soul Data Mart, and then the next day it becomes available. That is the process for creating a SDV rule. Now that I can also delete this particular one, and it's been deleted, and you'll notice it's gone. Last thing I want to show you is there's more to this search selection that you need to be aware of. And I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to do a search on the Soul Data Mart. This is more of a quality assurance review on what I'm going to show you here. I'm going to choose California. I'm going to look at the interpretations that are available. And you'll notice that these are all of the interpretations for California that do not have a Soul Data Viewer rule. So you can see that there's a great deal of more maps that can be created. However, there's this one that's got a 2 and a 3. Well, the 2 here says this is a non-national interpretation that doesn't conform to the state interpretation. Well, what does it mean? This is the state naming convention right here. CA prime farmland. CA, actually all we really needed was a prime farmland CA to denote California, but The naming convention requires anything that's not owned by Pangea to be parenthetical state coded for a suffix. So CA in parentheses is a state code. The second thing is, you'll notice that the interpretation is indicated as not ready for use in NASA's, and yet this interpretation has been exported to WebSol server, basically the Sol Data Mart, and it is available for download and for use, but this was marked in NASA's as not ready for use. So technically it shouldn't even be on Sol Data Mart. It should never have been exported. So that gives you a clue. If it's a plus, you can go ahead and create a Sol Data Viewer rule. If it's a 2, it'll give you the indication as to why you can't create a rule, and you'll see the 2 and the 3 there. So that gives you a quick rundown, 20 minutes, 21 minutes rundown on how to create a Sol Data Viewer rule on an interpretation stored in the Sol Data Mart. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. The user guide goes into a great deal more detail on this, but I just wanted to show you that it only takes about 5 minutes to create these interpretations. And matter of fact, just to prove that to you, if you've got the interpretation information, then it doesn't take long for you to go in there and populate the description and go ahead and save it and set it up for review and posting to the WebSol survey. So any questions, go through your user guide or fire me an email message or Steve Peasley an email message, and we'll get right on it and help you out. That concludes this video.